The U.S. military says at least 3 sailors have been killed in a missile attack on a freighter off the coast of Yemen. They're the first deaths since Houthi rebels began attacking shipping in the Red Sea. Now, the group says the crew of the Barbados-flagged cargo vessel True Confidence ignored warning messages before it came under fire. The survivors were forced to abandon ship. The Houthis have been attacking ships in what they say is retaliation for Israeli military action in the Gaza Strip. The group, which is backed by Iran, has forced maritime traffic to divert away from the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, one of the world's busiest shipping routes. Well, U.S. and British attacks on Houthi targets in Yemen have so far failed to deter the rebels.
The United States will continue to hold the Houthis accountable for their attacks, which have not just disrupted international commerce, not just disrupted the freedom of navigation in international waters, and not just endangered seafarers, but now tragically killed a number of them.
All right, a spokesman for the U.S. government there. Let's get more on this from Veena Ali-Khan. She researches Yemen and the Persian Gulf and is based in New York. Veena, welcome to the show. These are the first fatalities from these strikes, which have been going on for months. Why has this Western naval force, led by the U.S., been so unable to stop the Houthis, which many of us would see as something of a ragtag militia?
I mean, ever since the US and the UK started their strikes on Yemen, we can quite honestly see an ultimate lack of a clear, long-standing policy towards Yemen. And I think right now we are suffering the ramifications of implementing short-sighted policies which were initially intended, not to end the conflict in Yemen, but to contain it. And this strategy has really backfired. I think many analysts at the offset in January were warning the US, UK that these strikes will not deter the Houthis, and we've seen that, right? If anything, the strikes have encouraged the Houthis to increase their attacks in the Red Sea, and they've shown no interest to stop whatsoever. And if anything, the US and UK attacks on Yemen has fueled their own propaganda machine, the Houthis, and encouraged them to fire more. So at the moment, the Western countries, they have no good options. They can either increase their attacks on Yemen, which would ultimately lead to more Red Sea attacks, or they can either do nothing aside from make statements on social media. And in that scenario, the Houthis can claim that they're winning the conflict in the maritime theater.
Does this raise the stakes for the Houthis? These are the first 3 deaths to this point. No one has been killed from their direct actions. Does this not potentially raise the resolve of other nations to do something about this?
I mean, this definitely raises the stake for the Western countries to do something, as now we have civilian deaths. But for the Houthis, I don't think so. Already in their media, they have pointed to the deaths of these civilians, to the fact that the ship didn't listen to their warning signs. And automatically, they connect anything that happens to the Red Sea to what's happening in Gaza, right? So whatever happens, they're not suffering any media loss through this, because they can ultimately tie and say that these civilian deaths are ultimately linked to the fact that the Americans won't stop Israel from its onslaught in Gaza.
This ship was bound for Saudi Arabia. The Saudis have kept out of this issue so far. Could this raise pressure on them to get involved? Briefly, if you can. Yeah,
so the Saudis and the Houthis have, their communication and their dialogue to end the conflict in Yemen has been ongoing, although it's been slightly slower than it was before the war in Gaza started. And I think the kingdom and the Houthis have been, very clear on their boundaries. The Saudis do not want any attacks on their border. And for the Houthis, they do not want a resumption of conflict. And we've seen thus far, both sides have respected those boundaries. And yes, the ship was heading to Saudi Arabia, but the attack was not on Saudi soil. And that's a big difference. And that's where the Saudis' red lines lie, essentially. And until we see Houthi attacks on Saudi's borders, I would say that the two countries can very much compartmentalize what happens in the Red Sea to their dialogue to end the conflict.
All right, that's Veena Ali-Khan in New York. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.